Hey everybody, this is Nate with Artec Industries. We're here to talk about the Dana 60 front truss and swap kit for JLs, JKs, and JTs. So I want to tell you a little bit about how this goes together. There's essentially a few different kits, one for the 2005 Plus Super Duty axles, the 99-04 axles, and also the Kingpin axles. They all go together pretty much the same way, so we're just going to kind of go on, use this Kingpin axle as a base and show you essentially how to put together the whole kit. It basically starts with the truss itself. Now the nice thing about the new Apex trusses is that you don't have to weld a top plate on here anymore. So it eliminates all this welding that we used to have to do. And really now you just do a couple small seams and then the seams that are welded to the axle itself. On this one we have some gussets right here which go underneath the upper control arms. Essentially slip those right in. They might need a little squeeze just to get them in tight. But then once you do that, you can just plop this right on. Essentially put it in place. Now the nice thing about this is I can essentially put this on the tube, find the casting and slide it over, and then slide it until it makes contact on all edges with the casting. Super easy, that's it. The truss is in place, it's clocked to where it's gonna go. That will locate your upper control arms as well too, in a very stable position, and they're not gonna move anywhere. You know, you're not gonna need to try and dial it in with different angles. So next, after that, it's pretty straightforward. The trusses all extend all the way from end to end. So now instead of having like a break here where there's like a 2-inch gap there used to be, now we have a piece that goes all the way to the very end. And this is essentially the underside of the coil bucket, which is right here. And you can essentially just drop that right in the slots. It goes in really fast, and that drops right on the axle. And you can see that it comes right up to the inner C, and then butts right up against the actual truss itself. One note thing here is that one thing that we really want to accomplish with this system is to make the coil buckets themselves a little bit more adjustable and dialed in. You can line it straight up there, and in fact, if you just line these sides up together, that's exactly how it's intended to go. However, with this, you can clock this a little bit. So say I want to add a little bit more pinion angle and I want my coil springs to be back a little bit, I can clock this piece independently, and you almost don't notice it. It still looks like it's pretty flush with the rest of the kit. So this allows some dialing in, which is really nice. It does make it a little bit more setup because it's not just like all done for you, but it allows you to dial it in particularly to your setup, which is important because not every vehicle is going to be the same, especially between all the different lift sizes and different vehicles as well too, and different builds. You might stretch it, you might do all kinds of stuff. So this gives us some flexibility. On the other side, same thing. You can see on this one, it's actually already contoured and cut out for this leaf spring perch. And then the coil bucket itself, one thing to note here is that on the one that goes on the driver's side, it has this larger cutout in it, as opposed to this side that has just a small little trim right there. That's for the track bar bracket. This is to clear your frame side track bar bracket. So this essentially drops on as well too. If you find yourself wanting to clock your coil springs, then you just need to grind this part out a little bit to rotate it slightly if you want to go back and forth. But otherwise, it just drops right on there. There's essentially no way that you can mess that up. It goes flat right on that spring perch. So that's kind of the basics right there. On the perches themselves, you can drop on these little pieces right here, which is essentially the coil centering circle, whatever you want to call it. And that drops in with a little tab right there. And then this guy basically goes in and sits right there and centers on it, so you have an even seam around all edges. Same on the driver's side as well too. For the actual track bar bracket, this one actually clicks together really nicely. We've put some additional fixturing in there, so essentially I don't even have this welded, and it's like already kind of tight in there. And essentially that will go right here. You can see where it's cut out for it right there. I have this in the way right here, this little spring thing, so I'm going to move this slightly. Sorry, to hold up the whole axle. But basically this will slide in right here. And there's a little jig right here that this essentially goes to, and it just fixtures right up in there. It goes around the axle. On the Kingpin, you may have to grind off this little pin. We don't know what that's for, but you may have to grind that off. It's no big deal. It doesn't really serve a purpose in this application. Now, in like the absolute, in a JK itself, The actual track bar location is a little bit further out like this, or sorry, closer to the center of the axle like this. And so that's just one thing to note. On a JK, you could put it in closer, which is technically where it's supposed to be. But a lot of times you're using a adjustable track bar, and definitely you can move this out as well, and that might even improve your angle on the track bar as well too. So that position all the way out is what's in for the JL and JT, and you can use that for the JK as well too. So that's the front side. On this side, additionally in there is this little tab. This is our sway bar tab, and that just jigs right up into that little slot right there on the coil bucket. You can see it right there. Weld that guy in, good to go. So that's that side. Now, if you have a 2005 plus Super Duty axle or a 9904, there's going to be some additional trimming on the casting. Let's take this off real quick and I'll kind of explain it. I don't have it here, we're not mocking it up, but on the 9904, it's got a little bit extra casting here, and you'll want to cut off the casting that goes around the tube, and you're going to want to take 2 inches of that casting off. If you've ever done any of our swap kits, you're familiar with this. Essentially, we're going to lose 2 inches of the casting on this side just to get some more axle tube right here. It's a pretty straightforward process, pretty easy to do. If you've got a 2005 plus Super Duty axle, you're in for a little bit more of a wild ride. You do have a lot of control arm casting to cut off up here. It's basically, you just cut it all off till it looks pretty smooth, actually almost identical to the way this looks. It's smooth here on the back side, and even on the underside it's a little bit more smooth. You can consult our instructions for that as well, so you look on our previous installs and I'll show you exactly what to cut off. But I'll tell you one little pro tip here. The porta band is your friend. That'll make that casting go a lot faster. So essentially, once you get that down, you'll have some exposed tube. You'll have a few inches of exposed tube here. For all the axles, that's what we're going for. We want at least about 3 inches of exposed tube here to mock everything else up. So on this side, I'm going to place this guy right on the axle itself. And then from there, it's the same deal, right? We use this coil bucket piece right here, jig it in, center this guy, and there. Weld the seam around there, weld that. That's exactly where your coil bucket's gonna sit. And sway bar just fixtures right into that little guy right there. Boom, it's done. This side is especially easy because of this leaf spring. It really locks it into place. Now, a little discussion about this guy and what's different about the Apex system. So, when we were reviewing this and looking at our previous 1-ton swap kits, we used to have a large piece that went over pumpkin that added a lot of extra height, a lot of extra weight, a lot of extra everything. And we really analyzed that and said, is this part really necessary for everything? Is a Dana 60 inherently strong right here, but just weak kind of from here out in a lot of instances? And we found that to be the case. Generally, the most weak point is right here, where the tube goes into the casting. So we beat that up, but this top part is relatively strong. It's incredibly strong, in fact. And so it doesn't need something that's really high here to really trust this as much. But that presents a challenge in that we wanted to make sure that we had a mounting location up here. So what we did is we redesigned this top cap and essentially made this a separate piece. And what it does is it's actually optional if it comes with the kits that provide a 4-link kit, but if you're doing like a 3-link kit like this one, like this is one of the options that we offer if you're just doing a 3-link kit, it doesn't come with that top cap. This just sits right here on the axle, and that's it. That's all you really need. So what that does for us is it provides us a little more clearance, less weight, less welding, a lot faster install, and in the end, a lot less expensive, which is really nice. However, if you want to maintain a traditional suspension style where you have 2 attachment points on the upper control arms, this guy is what we're going to do. And the nice thing about this is it's really stout, but yet it's also very low profile. So this allows us to get our lower control arms back down a little bit. On previous kits, you'll see them, they're pretty high. It's a pretty high separation up here, just because we wanted to get enough to weld up here. We had to have upper control arm here. Now I'm trying to get them back a little bit lower so that we have a little bit more higher clearance. The geometry is a little bit more factory-like, and we have a little bit better usage with some of the lift kits out there. So this guy essentially drops right on. You can see that it's really contoured here, leaves just a little bit of a gap which you can use to fill and get really good penetration, and essentially contours around the truss itself on this side, and then also butts up right here against the coil bucket as well too. And what you really want to do to make sure that this is really lined up is check this hole right here, and basically it should be very centered on it. It's a little bit off on this one. Every axle might differ just slightly, but this one is pretty darn close, so it's centered. You want to make sure that your seams are good right here. There might be a case where you might need to get some clamps like these or something like that, or clamp them down just to make sure it's really nice and tight. And then you can actually weld straight to this. This is cast steel, so you can weld to it just like you've done in other applications. You don't necessarily need to go buck wild and weld every little inch of it, but weld here, weld here, weld here. This is an ARB or an air locker, Yukon zip locker place port right here, so you can actually tie in the fitting right there. But what the really nice thing about this is it gets our upper control arms really low. So in this case, these are the optional pieces that are part of the kit, depending on which option you choose. And this essentially just fixtures right in here. Make sure I got the right one. These just go right in here, and they get it down really nice and low. Now, typically you'll have a bushing like this. Let me get this bushing in here. And you'll weld to where these two plates are 1/2 inch apart. And that's pretty straightforward right there. It gets it nice and low. If you were somehow able to run a factory upper control arm bracket on this, you might need to clearance it out a little bit on the bottom side because this is really tight to the differential. But this gets it really as close as you possibly can with this axle, and maintains a little bit more of your factory geometry, which is nice to be able to just bolt it right in. One thing to note on the 2005 Plus Super Duty axles and also the 99-04 axles is that they've got some extra casting here on the top. The 2005 actually has like a bulge that goes from here. It sticks out almost out as much as my finger here is like this. And it's kind of random. Sometimes they show up on certain castings and sometimes they don't. And then the 99-04 has some additional casting back here. You might need to grind those down. If it's got that little bulge right here, simply just make it flat with the rest of the axle. If it's got a little extra casting, you'll know when you actually put this on, you'll see that it's rubbing right here. This one actually has a tiny bit of it. You can see it rubs slightly on the casting right there. So what we'll do for that is, if we're a little worried about that, if that's keeping that from sitting flush, is we'll actually go in and just get a flap disc or a little grinder wheel, and we'll just grind down the casting a little bit here on the top. So for example, I'll just go, okay, let's put this on. Yep, that's not fitting flush perfectly. Okay, I'm gonna kind of rub it in and see, where is it rubbing? Oh, it's rubbing kind of right there. So what I'll come in here and do is just get a flap disc and grind that down to like a 45-degree angle, just a little bit, probably an 1/8 inch, maybe a little bit more, and then you'll be good to go. Just massaging it until we get it to fit. Try it on again. That seems to be a little more flush. So this is kind of a, just go at it and keep taking it away until you can get everything to fit nice and flush here. It should be about, this part right here should rotate forward and should be about 5/8 to this surface right here. So that will enable you to get this nice and flush and get a good weld right here. The seam will be tight right here at the top and along this side, and then right here it actually goes out wide, so you don't need to necessarily weld that side. But if you've got those little bumps, just grind them down and you'll be good to go. And this is the setup for the passenger side as well. It comes with these two plates right here. Sorry, let me get this. It's a little bit of a juggle, but essentially it comes with these two large side plates and then this middle gusset as well too. Now, you'll just weld this guy in, make sure there's a 1/2 inch even gap. We do have this optional piece that's coming soon. It's just a little centering tool that essentially allows you to fixture those guys in there, and then also centers the bushing for you as well too. So that just makes sure that everything's even. And essentially you'll just weld that all together and weld that to the axle itself. There's some little tiny jigs in here, and just little tiny tips that this thing fixtures into and places it right in the right spot. Now, if we come around the other side, let's check this out. We've got the lower control arm brackets and the shock brackets. It couldn't be simpler on this end. Really, you've got your lower control arm bracket. It's gonna go out nice and wide. and it's gonna fixture right there. Right in that outer spot right there. It's pretty obvious when you go to put that in. Now, there is a difference between your passenger side and your driver's side lower control arm bracket. Let me grab that one real quick. The passenger side one does not have this kick in right here. That kick in is specifically for the casting, to avoid the casting on this side. I can't really mock it up on this side because I've got this guy in place. So I'll just use this side, but this is the driver's side one, this is the passenger side. So hopefully that helps you. So once I fixtured that in, last step really to put this all together is you get your shock mount in, and it goes essentially right on top of it. And it goes in these little slots right here as well too. Essentially got it all, you know where all the pieces go, and it is ready to start welding. A couple tips on welding. Take it slow, let it cool slowly. If you're going to weld, say right here, weld something over here next. Weld something back here after that. Move it around, keep it from heating up in one area too much. That will help warpage. One of the really nice things about this new Apex truss compared to earlier truss designs is they used to go mostly on the top of the axle, but this actually, you can really see it, the actual welding is on the sides of the axle. So you're gonna get a lot less pulling up and more evening out because it's in the middle of the axle. So you shouldn't be in danger of that. Plus you don't have all these long welds as well too. That typically helps, heat things up and cool them down too quickly and warp things. So, but that's essentially how we put together Dana 60 front swap kit for JK, JL, and JT. If you guys have any questions, let us know and we'll be glad to help you out. Thanks a lot.